What is up, everybody? This is Jake with the Evolve Your Fitness podcast. Here this week to talk to you about the posterior chain, or the back of the legs, or the hamstrings and the butt. Basically, just a super underutilized structure in our bodies in CrossFit a lot of times. I feel like we don't use it as much, and therefore we don't get as much development from that side of the body. And then because of that, we start using it less and less because our quads get stronger. So let's go over what we're talking about first. So the posterior chain is anything on the backside of your body. I'm thinking of lower body. So I'm mostly focusing today on your butt and your hamstrings specifically. So that's on the backside of your body. It's used a lot when hinging, but if you don't hinge enough, a lot of times those muscles will atrophy or get smaller, weaker, and you'll start to use them less and less, and your quads will get stronger. So we squat a lot in CrossFit. It's a super important movement in CrossFit. It makes, I would say, squatting makes more of the movements that we do in CrossFit better, as opposed to the things that make your posterior chain better. So the quads get stronger, whether you're front or back squatting. Front squat obviously is a lot more focused on the quads. And then this transfers over into your cleans, your snatches, which are, and your jerks for that matter, which are some of our most important movements in CrossFit. We test them the most. But I think, in my opinion, when you test them, that's more testing your function of your ability to squat than it is to test your ability to hinge. And that sounds counterintuitive to some people, and some people will say, well, wait a second, it's a hinge. But it's a little bit different hinge, because when you're doing it really well, most of the time when you're set up a little more upright than you'd be on a deadlift. And because of that, it's going to focus more on your quads, especially, and maybe this is just particular to me, I'm a little bit longer limbed person. I have to get down real low, so there's a lot of leg drive in that. And then even when you're catching it, you're dipping underneath, you're doing a miniature squat again just to catch it. So it's almost like you're doing a double squat when you're doing power cleans, power snatches, in addition to, you're obviously squatting when you're doing squat snatches, squat cleans. We also have wall balls, biking, just a lot of things. Whereas movements that we do that are primarily posterior chain driven movements, I would say are dumbbell snatch a lot of times. But I will say that you can get away with not using your posterior chain at all in this. You have to be pretty intentional about it. And a lot of the people who blow up their backs really bad when they're doing dumbbell snatches are super quad dominant people. D-ball cleans, also just the nature of having to get down really low when you D-ball clean, or lower than you do with a barbell, gives you a little more hamstring activation. Lunges sometimes will as well, although we run into the same problem with lunges, in that it's a lot of times you can overtake that movement with your quads, and we'll get a lot of people with sore quads after lunges as opposed to sore hamstrings, because they're so quad dominant. Different variations of lunges will change that, just depending on how you perform them, whether it's a front rack, using a sandbag, fat bar, stuff like that. Everything changes it. And you can focus a little bit more on the glutes and hamstrings. Deadlifts, when done well, are the hamstrings are the primary mover, in the glutes. Same thing, sprints, like sprinting, which we don't do very often. That's a hot topic right now. Hot topic in our gym. In fact, we're doing a lot of we're doing a weekly sprint session in our gym. And then pistols as well. I would say pistols aren't a hamstring dominant movement, but you use a lot more glute in a pistol than you would like in a normal squat. Still a lot of quads on that, but that's kind of like one of those in between movements. But and those are like, I would say, like movements that we do in competition or in a workout. Other movements that are really good, like a hip extension, is awesome. Good mornings are awesome. Obviously, both of those are super focused on the hamstrings, but a lot of those aren't movements we're going to do in workouts, so they're extra. And we tend to how would they say it? Study for the test, I guess. And a lot of times you don't get a great direct carryover from doing those movements into the testing, how we test things, whether it's in the open or quarterfinals. And I'm a big believer in everything comes from the top down. Things that you changes you see in the sport, you'll see come down into the open because a lot of us do the open, a lot of affiliates do the open, and of course you want to see your members do really well in the open. And so it's hard sometimes to be like, well, we're going to spend some time on this thing that is definitely not going to help you in the open. I mean, we do a decent amount of that, but even for me, I have very strong opinions on programming. It's a challenge sometimes to focus on those things when you know that it's not going to help you score in the open. Um, so let me think where I want to take this next. It's I think that building up these hamstrings, one, it can totally help you reduce your risk of injury long term. When people are quad dominant and only have fun, now I should also say you don't want to like completely neglect the quads and only have hamstrings. That's not good either, right? We're looking for a balance here. But building up the hamstrings, it can create a lot of reduce your risk of injury. The hamstrings are still used in squatting, right? They're still a big support system. They're just not a giant mover on it. Like you're not going to get huge carryover, work on your hamstrings, and suddenly your squat's going to go up by 50 pounds. Um, but they can help you reduce injury. And also like another thing that we're talking about with sprinting, people talk about sprinting and injury and people pulling their hamstrings. I think one of the reasons why that's such a problem is we just use our hamstrings so little. They're a very untrained part of our body. And so any amount of stress to them can really push him over the edge and risk getting injured. Um, and I think that sprinting is crazy important. I think that we spend a lot of time focusing on long metabolic efforts, but short sprinting, explosive, those things have a ton of value too. Now, do they have a 1/3 of the value or 50% of the value? I don't know. I just think that we should be able to do it in some capacity, and that it's important. I also think that sprinting challenges the body in a way that's unique that you don't feel in any other thing. And me personally, when I sprint, it my body feels like, oh, this is how I am supposed to move. You get sore in your abs, you get sore in your obliques, all sorts of strange spots on your body get sore, and your hamstrings get lit up, your glutes get lit up, and it just feels so good to me. And I don't know, I feel like extremely. This is gonna sound weird, but anabolic. Like I feel like that's like muscles, serious muscular fatigue that I don't get on other things. So I think one of the reasons why this happens is we don't test the deadlift a whole lot or deadlift as much as we probably should in CrossFit because deadlifting injuries tend to be like more acute and more scary. You go to deadlift and you blow out your back, and you take a knee and you can't move and this, that, and the other thing. And so people think, well, deadlifts are a little more dangerous. I don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze, you'll hear. But that's just the injuries that are right there in your face, right? There are other injuries from squatting too much or doing too many pistols or too many lunges, which is like the long-term overuse injuries, which I think we see a lot in CrossFit as well. Um, because we squat so much, and I don't know it probably because there's not as much balance in our programming as we should have. Uh, it's so much easier to program things that use your quads and continuously use them than it is to program stuff to use your hamstrings. That's the whole point of this conversation, of course. Um, and because of that, then we just continually use that. And then I know like everybody blames it, they want to blame it on the pistol. I'm one of the people in the camp of a pistol is actually going to tell you how well you squat. So the people who barely break parallel, who struggle with mobility, those are always the people who struggle on pistols. And find them really challenging and hard on their body, and that the people who squat really well never seem to have a problem with it. Um, you know, I think the pistol gets a bad rap, and I don't think that there's any bad movements. I think you're just doing too many things, and getting overuse is a problem. If you're squat cleaning too much and you're hitting that bottom position of the squat clean really hard, that's going to wear your knees out too. And that's like you know, very dynamic forces on the knees while actually adding weight. So to me, it's crazy to blame the pistol and not think about squat cleans or squat snatches or whatever. Right? There's no bad movements. You might not be prepared for it, or you're overdosing, underdosing, and that's why balance is so important. That's why us programming nerds focus on it so much, because it's so nuanced, and we're always striving to get better. I think I once heard my old coach Max El Haj say that he really hopes that in 10 years he's not coaching he's not coaching the way he is today, because he's hoping that he evolves and gets better. And it's crazy because I think he said this at the time too, is some of the things will actually be resorting back to things the ways he coached before, because in jujitsu they call it belt mentality. No matter how high of a belt you are, you should always be looking back at the basics and looking at everything as a white belt, trying to glean everything out of the basics, and learn as much as you can, and not get sucked in by the fancy, and always continue to evolve everything. Right? Some might say evolve your fitness. Now, I will say that these workouts are very hard to program. Um, it takes a lot of intention, and something that my friend J.R. Howell is really good at programming. I Right now I have two workouts in mind that he's programmed. One is the bicarb workout that he's got at Syndicate Crown this year, which is the deadlift, ascending deadlift ladder with the front rack lunges in between every round. That's going to smoke people's hamstrings and their butts. Um, just a great combo, very unique, and super focused on that backside of the body. And you're going to see some people who are really strong and really fit who just struggle with that, because that area of their body is not super developed, and it'll be wild to see. It's very cool. The other one is a workout I did last year at Crash Crucible at his competition, which was another ascending deadlift ladder with a sled pull in between, and I'm pretty sure those are similar for a reason, right? He wanted to do a similar workout for both of those, but both of those are just very unique. Attacking the body in a way that most people aren't used to. And once again, you're going to have people who are really strong in their quads, and they might be able to overcome it. I remember back in the day when people would do a lot of high rep deadlifts, they would talk about the shark fins on their back. It was basically their adductors were just lighting up so much from them rounding over and using their quads, that they would get like a lower back pump. And that was way back when, and not a ton has changed since then. Granted, I think people are a little bit stronger and a lot more focused on technique, but it stands to reason that it's still a thing that we struggle with a little bit today. I know people, when we're talking about whether the sprints should be in the games or not, we have a lot of people who are unsure of it. Is it too risky for injuries? And it's crazy to think that a task like sprinting, that we see athletes doing in every single sport in the world, and then there's also just sports that are just sprinting, right? Track and field is just sprinting. That we would say we're the fittest without being able to do that. We're scared that we're going to injure ourselves sprinting. Now, granted, you got to be careful with that, and you got to pull data over a long time. Maybe doing something like a 5 rep max deadlift straight into a 40-yard sprint is not a good call, but we should be able to sprint in some way, shape, or form without being worried about injuring ourselves, right? Yeah, so these workouts need to be super done with a lot of intent. A lot of times there's two different ways you can go about it. You can just hammer the hamstrings in a way that you have to use your hamstrings over the course of the workout because your quads will get tired. Or another way is, and we had something like this a little bit earlier in the week, which was you can pre-fatigue the quads so that they can't help when you're doing other things like something like a lunge or like a deadlift. So we had a workout that was it was a 60-foot lunge followed by 12 dumbbell push jerks and then a max calorie standing bike erg. And over the course of the workouts, your quads get more tired and more tired. You can't help but use your hamstrings and your butt more, and use that as a primary mover. Now, once again, nothing's foolproof. People with crazy, strong, and enduring quads can probably figure out a way to still use it, but it's something that it's a way that you can test it. And people who have both strong and enduring quads and strong and enduring hamstrings are going to have a better time on that. End of story. Same thing with like JR's workouts with the deadlifts and the sled pull, or the deadlifts um, and the front rack lunge. The people who have a well-rounded leg, both in the front and the back, are going to thrive. I guess one movement I forgot to add in here is sled pulls and sled pushes. That uses a ton of the backside of the body. Use a lot of hamstring, a lot of glute on that when you're driving. So a lot of people will find that if they are quad dominant, sometimes those get really tired really fast because it's just the body is meant to move that sled using a little bit more hamstring and glute, and it's more efficient moving that way. So that's a whole nother thing. Once again, we don't see that tested a lot just because sleds are very hard to what do you say, match. It's hard to make the lanes match up and have it be fair amongst the competitors. So we don't see that a whole lot in testing. We don't see it in the open, anything like that. So it's a little bit more challenging to test. And we still use sleds weekly because I love them. I think they're a great tool, and I think they have tremendous training value on your body. So that's some of my thoughts on that. But yeah, basically, I want to see CrossFit as a whole, kind of get really big on, or not really big, or get more focused in on the backside of the body. I think that we'll see tremendous gains in our fitness if we can bring that out, and we can reduce injuries. We also, that you hear a lot of times people will talk about, probably like Andrew Hiller. I'm sure I've heard him say that you see with CrossFitters a lot of times there's these big old quads and like no hamstring, no butt, right? And it looks weird. Why have our bodies developed that way? Well, because that's kind of what we're testing. All hinges are not created equal, and when you're programming competition and you see you've already programmed, we'll say, you have to get snatches in, and then you have to get cleans in with a barbell. Doing a whole nother hinge from the floor, sometimes you're like, oh, well, we already have these two hinges, but not all hinging is created equal. And you have to get, I think the deadlift is super important to be in almost any competition if you want to have balance among that front of the leg, back of the leg situation. The other thing you could possibly do is like hang cleans and hang snatches, especially like kettlebell hang snatches, stuff like that. Those also can be very good for using the hamstrings as a primary mover. So those can get mixed in there too, but it's really challenging, and I understand why we don't see it as much, but I think it needs to be a big focus. Like I said, it'll reduce our injuries. It'll make us better, more well-rounded humans, make us capable of doing more, which is the whole point of CrossFit. We shouldn't be afraid to do anything, whether it's deadlifting, sprinting, doing pistols. That's the whole idea, is that we are ready for anything, any movement. So anyways, quick podcast today. Since I'm by myself, I don't really have anybody to riff off of, but I hope you enjoy this. I hope you learned a little bit something more about about I don't know, movements and the backside of your body and how we can move more efficiently. And that's all I got. Please like and subscribe. Thanks for hanging out with me. And remember, more protein, less bullshit. Thanks.